Hello again. Welcome back to the Money Corner. During the next 3 weeks, we're going to help you get some insight and show you a picture of the publishing industry. Not only a picture historically, but some of the subtleties about the industry, because I think some of you out there are not only consumers and readers of books, but some of you may be potential authors, writers, and you may want to know how you deal with the subtleties and the nuances of the industry. I've got 3 people whose credibility is extremely high and offer a lot of experience and a lot of history in the industry. I guess collectively you've each been in the industry minimum 25 years. Ken, I'm not shortchanging you, are you?
A little bit more than that.
A little bit more than that. Ken Hurst, my first guest, here on my left, formerly was president of Prentice Hall International. The charming lady next to him, Irma Heldman, is a friend of mine of many, many years standing. Irma has been with Ballantine Books, Playboy Books. What was another one?
Holt,
Reinhardt and Winston, and she currently is a publisher, among others, perhaps 10 publishers, and she currently is a publisher of her own and heads her own company now. And the gentleman next to Irma is Jerry Ozer, a neighbor of mine, neighbor of all of ours from Englewood. Jerry formerly was with Collier, Arno Press, Arno New York Times, and Pittman from England. And Jerry also is an independent publisher. Ken, you are not the father of the industry or the oldest person. Well, you may have many years seniority here with our panel, but you have seen the industry not only from a national view here in the United States, but working with Prentice Hall International, you've seen the changes in the industry on a worldwide basis. An industry that a few years ago was dominated by conglomerates. And an industry that some people were very pessimistic about 10 years ago or 8 years ago, and now seems to be thriving.
Well, it is thriving, Phil. The volume for the publishing industry, for the book business as a whole, went up 9.5% last year. The total volume now is 8.2 billion. 12 years ago it was only just over 3 billion. Incidentally, that 8.2 billion is somewhat just below the dog food industry and just above the peanut butter industry, which means that Americans spend more money on feeding their dogs than they do on buying books.
Well, I would say one of the horrors of being in publishing, Ken, is the fact that when you are an impulse item, they will buy peanut butter and dog food before they'll buy that paperback in the supermarket, which is one of the things that publishers have to concern themselves with all the time when they spend, in fact, lots of money to get those books out there.
But one of the ironies that I see is that publishing is thriving today after government have continued to decrease their expenditures. In the 60s we had government spending tremendous amounts of money on education, and publishing is thriving today when we have competition like television, where most of our citizens are pulled away by the Olympics. Jerry, does the irony impress you, or can you account for it?
I think there's a historical parallel. During the Great Depression of the 1930s, book sales went up and library attendance went up, and we're finding the same kind of thing happening today. But I think there is something else to be said along those lines on a more optimistic note. I think we're gathering the fruits of the post-World War II educational revolution. I think back to my own Army days when I was one of a handful of men in the company who had any college education whatsoever. Nowadays, if we had a universal draft, I suspect the typical Army company would have 60 to 70% of its men with some kind of college training, if not college degrees. Well, some of this has rubbed off. We had the GI Bill after World War II. We had the educational boom of the 1960s. People did learn to read. People did learn to deal with ideas. People did enjoy reading. I think that's what we're seeing now.
Phil, if I may, going back to your implied question, has television hurt the book business? Has it diminished reading? I don't think so. And the funny thing is that when radio first came out, remember, all the booksellers, all the publishers thought, who wants to read a book now when they can listen in the privacy of their own homes?
Exactly.
Exactly. And when television came, they said, who would want to read books when they can watch movies, have a front row seat in their own living room? Well, it is not true, because more and more books are being sold as a result of television than ever before. Every publisher tries to get his book and his author displayed on TV, on the Merv Griffin show, on the Good Morning America show, any of the big shows, because it will hypo sales and make a bestseller overnight.
Well, I think what you're dealing with, Ken, is a double-edged sword, basically. I think, yes, that is true, that television has helped. I think it has hurt in some ways, but it has helped. I can remember when paperbacks first came in, for instance, and everybody said, paperbacks is going to ruin this industry. I mean, paperbacks absolutely going to ruin, absolutely the opposite was true.
It saved the industry.
It saved the industry,
Yes.
Exactly.
Yes.
But in the early days, there were a lot of gurus who were literary gurus who were saying, oh my God, what a terrible idea, you know, etc. True of radio, true of television, true of all the things which, and I think media feeds upon one another, and I think what you were saying, Jerry, about people coming into it, I think even young people are coming in as readers, which we didn't think of because they grew up on television and were saying, oh, well, they'll never read or buy books, but in fact they do.
They are, and despite our hand-wringing
Yeah.
about the educational state of the nation, I think we're in much better condition now than we were when I was a kid, for example. Another thing we must keep in mind, we have to look at the numbers. The population is larger, which means our market has expanded. Further, Ken, I think this would relate to what you were doing at Prentice Hall, the desire for American books overseas, of
Yes.
course, has expanded.
But I just want to make the point first, that although we have a large market, what is it, 240 million population now, America ranks 28th in the world on books bought per capita. 28th, that's pretty low down the line. Scandinavian countries, a lot of European countries are much, much higher than we. So that even though we have a large market, that doesn't consist of a total reading market. And some of the people who watch TV are going to watch TV who never read books even if there were no TV. There is a TV, so they sit glued to the screen every night. But they're not real book readers. The book readers have grown, as Jerry said, and the market has grown. And even though everybody in the book business complains of the 10% increase last year, they're crying all the way to the bank.
But does that include book clubs? I would like to know, do you include book clubs in the increase?
At Prentice Hall we had 35 book clubs. We keep adding new ones. And the beauty of it is that if you publish a book, say on management, and say you print 7,000, which is a very small minimum printing, 3,500 would immediately go into the book club and be sold through the book club, which means you're home free and clear. So you may or may not sell the other 3,500 through the bookstores. You don't, it doesn't really matter if you don't.
No, I know. The other thing is that what Jerry was saying, and I think that you have to point that out, which is a history of publishing. The Book of the Month Club was born in the Depression when people didn't have anything else to do, and that was their bookstore, in effect, even in places where there were bookstores.
The trouble with the book clubs, and I think most of us are in the publishing business because we love books.
It's changed, but yes, I think most
Isn't
of
it
it.
true?
Oh,
Remember Kenneth Graham in The Wind of the Willows said there's nothing in
yes.
the world so fascinating as mucking about with boats. Well, I think all of us feel there's nothing in the world so fascinating as mucking about with books. And the trouble with book clubs, I belong to several book clubs, even like
not Prentice Hall.
but I belong to the Book of the Month Club.
Right.
The problem is, the other day I spent $25 to get the copy of the new Bartlett's quotations to keep in my study at home.
Plus handling and postage, right?
Plus handling and postage.
Right.
Unfortunately, out of 4 corners of the book, 3 were bent. We cannot send a book through the post and get it safely to the consumer in one piece. Now, whether this is the publisher's fault or the post office fault, I don't know.
As somebody who ran a couple of book clubs, I guess it's a fulfillment is the toughest part of it, which is
You all have been talking about the industry and where the industry is going, and we've really we've run out of time in terms of the first segment. We'll come back again next week. I'll have these people here, Ken Hurst, Irma Heldman, Jerry Ozer is my guest again. We'll continue our conversation about the industry. Come back and be with us next week, and have a good night, everybody.